Hello and welcome to this edition of The Debate on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons in Paris. Tonight, France on the threshold of radical reform, as the UMP party of French President Nicolas Sarkozy cruises towards what most now expect will be a crushing victory in the French parliamentary elections. Sarkozy is calling for a special session of the National Assembly. On the agenda, a raft of reforms from taxation to unemployment, crime and immigration. France's new president clearly plans to hit the ground running. Tonight, we focus our attention on the burning issue of immigration. Sarkozy has promised, among other things, tougher entry rules for migrants' families and language tests. Well, joining me tonight to debate the pros and cons of the Sarkozy plans are Vaiju Naravan, European correspondent of India's The Hindu newspaper, Stefan de Vries, Paris correspondent of the Dutch public television station RTL4, Nathalie Albacha-Malige, who is the head of Diversio, a company for encouraging ethnic diversity in management, and Philippe de Bruycker, a lawyer and specialist on European immigration and asylum law, who joins us from Brussels. Thanks for being with us on the debate. Sarkozy's immigration plans have been savaged by the left, applauded by the right, and resoundingly supported by the French people. Among the aims of the new legislation is to make it more difficult for families of immigrants to join them from their countries of origin. Let's listen now to this assessment of the immigration bill by Jérôme Martinez, who's a representative of CIMAD, a French NGO which gives support to migrants and asylum seekers. We're going to... Okay.
There are two main points coming through at the moment with the plans for an immigration law. Resources are scarce, so people believe again that foreigners are bringing their families over to France using state money. Yet for many years now, immigrants have had to bear a large amount of the cost themselves. But the argument itself gives the impression that immigrants are taking from us all. The other very dangerous element is the call for language tests in the country of origin. These would be implemented with no proper control or methods at all. We'd end up with a competition to get into France, affecting families who would normally be able to come here under international conventions.
Okay, there are a couple of points there. Natalie, if I could begin with you first. The assumption that immigrants are an economic burden on the state is a false one, according to the speaker there. Is that fair on his part, do you think, or is the assumption perhaps correct that illegal immigrants in particular are an economic burden on the state?
Well, it really depends what standpoint you take. If you look at the EU in general, for example, we're going to have in the next few years a real shortage of talents in some jobs and in some areas of the population. There's going to be more and more older people, and also we're going to have less and less young people skilled for some jobs. So the problem will be on a global level where to get the right talents to work in our companies here. So on a global level, we will need to bring in more people to get our companies working. For example, in engineering, more and more companies are outsourcing some of their R&D services to India, not only because Indian engineers are supposed to be cheaper, but also because they can't find enough engineers right here.
But is the general point, which is criticized by the speaker we just heard now, that many migrants are an economic burden on the state, that they just take social security, a fair one, do you think, or is it simply a misconception? Stefan, what do you think?
Well, I don't have the exact numbers, but it seems a misconception to me. I mean, every new immigrant is an opportunity for a country to earn more money. Every new immigrant is also a taxpayer if he finds a job. Well, so the standpoint of seeing an immigrant as an economical burden, I don't think, it's probably a right-wing argument, but if you will look at the numbers, I think it won't hold up very long.
I think in France you have something like an estimated 400,000 illegal immigrants. When these people go to social security offices, if you don't have papers, you don't get help. You are not given medical coverage. You don't become part of the system because you can't. You can't open a bank account.
The government
argument is totally false, because if they were a burden on the economy, we would find 400,000 people begging in the streets. You don't find them begging in the streets because they're working in the parallel black economy which exists here. So they do find jobs. They have jobs. This country has been able to absorb them as other countries have been able to absorb them. It's all this fear of unemployment. And the fear of unemployment here has got to do with the fact that a lot of the people do not qualify. They fall through the nets of education. They're not properly educated. They're functionally illiterate, and therefore there is unemployment. It's got nothing to do with the immigrant problem as such.
Philippe, in Brussels, could I bring you in on this debate here? The argument is that the government's argument is specious, that migrants, whether be they illegal or legal, aren't a burden on the economy, that they're fulfilling useful economic functions. Is that a view that you share?
No, certainly not. And I think it's quite important to also remember the thing that the European Council, meaning the heads of states and the head of government in the Hague programme, have decided to underline the fact that migration can be a positive contribution to economic growth and will be an important element in order to meet the Lisbon agenda. And it's true that in a certain member states like Spain, Ireland and the UK, immigration was this last year a very positive factor for economy. So that view is completely wrong, and it's not always the view expressed by governments. Sometimes it might be the impression given by the ministers of justice and home affairs, but the presidents and prime ministers of the European Union say exactly the contrary.
One of the other points that Mr. Martinez made there, the audio clip we just listened to, was that the new legislation would introduce tougher regulations on families coming to join migrants who are already here. He regards that as being particularly unfair. I suppose this is less of the economic policy on the part of the government and more of its emphasis on passing the Frenchness test.
Well, indeed, a new legislation is going to be adopted in France in order to implement a European directive on family reunification of 2003. It's from a legal point of view quite complicated, because that directive allows what will be done by the French law, but the French government is not forced to do that. In fact, the European directive is quite neutral and doesn't realize real harmonization in the European Union. So this law, I think it's important to be clear about that, is the precise will of the French government, and it's not a measure which has to be implemented because of Brussels. Now, regarding the content, you have different elements. You have, first of all, more income, more financial resources requested from migrants in order to make sure that they are able to sustain their families. This can be seen indeed as a restrictive element. And you have the second point, which is the language requirement. I think that per se it's not bad to care about the fact that family members should know the language of their future host country. But the important element is to know how you do that, and with a goal in mind. I think the important thing is to help people to learn the language and to do that in a positive spirit, to welcome them in better conditions so that they will integrate in an easier way. It should not be a measure in order to block immigrants, because in that sense it can then be enter in contradiction with the right to family life and create more difficulty. So I shouldn't say that the content per se of that law is the problem. I see more a problem maybe with the method.
Vaishu, if I could go to you. Do you share that view?
Yes and know. I share it and I don't share it at the same time. On the one hand, I think the government's attitude is extremely hypocritical, because Nicolas Sarkozy himself has said, oh, you know, it's human rights, people have to be allowed to join their families, except that you keep on passing legislation that keeps putting hurdles, increasingly higher hurdles for them to come in. Now, if you examine this question of language learning in your country before you come here, look at India. I mean, we are 1 billion people. How many French schools are there? How many people are going to be able to learn the language there? What is the standard of French teaching in India? Who can go to the Alliance Française except people who live in very big cities and earn huge salaries? So this is a discriminatory measure. Who is going to decide whether the person who's coming from there has passed his test or not passed his test? You know, this is something which, even saying that a family must have enough money to support them. I mean, there are lots of French people here who live on 600 euros a month or 700 euros a month. There are lots of elderly people whose pensions are 500 euros a month. And if they can stay here on that, why cannot an immigrant's family who is also earning, who's also contributing, who's got his papers and wants to bring his family over? Now, this is a discriminatory measure, according to me.
It's interesting to know who it's directed against as well, because if the target is Francophone Africa, then one has to assume that many of those people speak French to a reasonable standard. So does it make very much sense?
Well, it depends on where they're coming from. I mean, lots of people also in French-speaking Africa do not actually speak French. I mean, it's silly to presume that just because you've been colonized by the French, everybody in a particular country speaks French. I mean, lots of people speak the local languages, and only those who've had access to French schools, French-speaking schools, speak French.
The Minister for Immigration, Brice Hortefeux, has said that what he sees as being behind this is getting a better quality of immigrant. He wants to up the standard. He wants to get economic immigration rather than family immigration. If I could go to you, Natalie, on this, does that make any sort of sense?
Well, we are going to see in the next 20 years a real competition among developed countries to get the best immigrants from emerging countries in. The US and Europe are going to compete for those talents. And so
there is a certain logic behind this.
There is a real logic behind this. Now, as you said, it's really the implementation that would make the difference. Now, teaching French for people to come here is not stupid at all. On the contrary, it's the right thing to do.
Agree.
But the question is, how would you do it?
And where do you do it as well?
And where do you do it?
And who judges whether you're proficient or not?
Yeah,
does it make sense, do you think, to have the test in the country of origin? Should people already know French before they come here?
Well, that's another question. I mean, you could always bring the right talents in and teach them French here. Now, why would you do it there? Is it really to help, or is it to create
hinder
a barrier?
Stefan, what do you think of that?
Well, the Dutch are doing that already. If you want to emigrate to the Netherlands, you will have to do a test in the country of where you're living. So at the embassy, it's a fairly simple test. So there are too many people.
But the facilities to learn Dutch abroad aren't that many either.
Well, I don't know if there are any classes, Dutch classes in, I don't know, Timbuktu, but probably there are. But apparently the Dutch government finds that there are too many people getting good results at the test, so they're raising the level of the exams right now, and you have to answer some questions about civilization. I don't know if it's a good thing. I do think that it's a good thing that you should learn the language of the country where you're going, because that facilitates success, economical success. But getting the best of the developing countries here, I think that's rather neo-colonialist, because you're causing a brain drain in the third world, and those countries really need those people who are really well educated. And I think it's really arrogant, actually.
No, also the whole cost. How much does a country spend educating a doctor? The whole high school, after that medical college for 5 years, it costs the public exchequer a huge amount of money. And then you're just tweaking them off from developing countries who can ill afford to train them in the first place. Now, here we're talking about fair exchanges and, co-development and all that. Where is the co-development in this if you're just going to take off people that way? And it's for me, it's terrifying, because I think if the French or any other European country needs to import labor, then they should be prepared to train them and prepared to put in the right kind of financial investment to train them to do the kind of jobs that they have. Why should they be cherry picking and picking the best of what the developing world has to offer? I find that disgusting.
Philippe, very briefly, if I could just bring you in. Cherry picking a bad idea?
Well, I have maybe a slightly different view, because also I think that a very important element today for Europe and the member states of the European Union is also to have a more balanced policy between the fight against illegal immigration and opening channel for legal migration. So if you think that it's necessary to open channels for legal migration, you don't have also to be naive.
Philippe, I'm going to have to interrupt you there, I'm afraid. We're going to take a 12-minute break now. We're going to listen to the news and weather. Join us again soon. Welcome back to the debate on France 24. I'm Robert Parsons, and tonight we've been discussing Nicolas Sarkozy's plans for the reform of French immigration policy. Joining me again are Vaiju Naravan, Europe correspondent of India's The Hindu newspaper, Stéphane de Vries, Paris correspondent of the Dutch public television station RTL4, Nathalie Albacha-Malige of Diversio, a company for encouraging ethnic diversity in management, and Philippe de Bruycker, a lawyer and specialist on European immigration and asylum law, who joins us from Brussels. Welcome back. If I could start by turning back to the legislation again of Nicolas Sarkozy. He says that one of his ideas is to persuade migrants to go back to their country of origin, and one of the ways he wants to do that is to offer money to those who may have the desire to go, may not have the desire to go back. Something in the region of 6,000 euros is the sum that's been spoken to. He says he's been speaking to the Senegalese leadership about this. They like the idea. He's selling it as a way to reinvest back in the countries of origin of people who have come to France. Do you see that as being a way forward? Does it help, first of all, the countries of origin? And is it a good thing for France?
Well, I think that in a way we will have to encourage more people to go from their country and to our developed country back and forth. We will need to get people to understand that we're in a global market and global talent pool. So for developing countries to have people trained in more developed countries could be a good asset for their further development. But we need to make sure also it's not a way to really expel some people that we might need here, and also for humanitarian reason. We need to make sure that those people are treated well and fairly.
Philippe, in Brussels, is there any precedent anywhere else in Europe for an idea of this sort, of giving migrants money to go back to their country of origin?
Not at European level, because the return policy at European level is just emerging and not advanced. But there have been several attempts at national level in member states, and I think that what we can observe is that in most cases this was either a failure, either had a very limited effect, because if people are moving to Europe is because they want to achieve something. Very often they have been selected by their family or their community in order to win some money abroad, and if you send them back by force, you just prove to the country of origin that they have failed, and so that's why they don't want to return. So I think that today we should more look, which is not an easy question, but we should look for the implementation of a kind of migration, circular migration, and not imagine that the solution is in the return of people.
Vaiju.
I absolutely agree with that. And actually, why has this policy failed in the past? It's failed also because when people come here, they get married, they put down families, they put down roots. Their children grow up here. The children of so many migrants have grown up to be French. They don't know their language, the language of their country of origin. And for them, going back or being sent away with their parents is like being sent into exile. What are you going to do? The children who are born here are of French nationality because they've been born on French soil, of people who generally have papers. And I think the law has now changed, because it's no longer the law of the blood, but it's no longer the law of the soil, but it's the law of the blood. Because earlier on, any child born on French soil automatically got citizenship, irrespective of whether his immigrant parents had nationality or not.
But what do you say to the argument that it's a good way of encouraging economic development in the country of origin?
I don't know. I think it depends on what the conditions are in the country that they left. A lot of people come here escaping misery. A lot of people come here escaping political persecution. They come here escaping famines, wars. I mean, they don't necessarily want to go back to a situation of tremendous instability.
Natalie?
Well, I personally don't think that 6,000 euros are going to make people actually leave France. I think that the 6,000 euros are going to help those who might come back anyway. For me, that's the difference. But we also need to see that some big French companies are starting to invest more and more in Africa. And for them, bringing people here to France to learn more about the way they operate is something very important. And they would anyway try to get them go back to their country to manage some of their companies there. So in this way, it could be a real help and a positive help.
Stefan, any views on that?
Yeah, I think the whole policy is a very short-term policy, and I think Europe in 10, 15 years from now will be begging all the people we're sending away to come back, because simply...
We'll need the labour.
We'll need the labour, yeah. Without the immigrants, no European economy anymore. And so, it's a short-term vision, very bad.
And I think this whole question of immigration becoming a problem. Why should immigration necessarily be seen as a problem? France is a country of origin. You've had lots of people who've come in. You've had huge waves of migration from Poland, from Italy, from all kinds of places. Of course, in the last several years, it's become a problem. Post 9/11, Islam has become a definite problem. The whole question of color, of race, and of religion makes a very lethal kind of mix. Also, I think in France in particular, the immigration policy has been extremely badly administered, simply because you dumped those immigrants in these huge big city complexes on the edges of large cities. So they were sort of told, hey, you guys are sub-citizens. You do not belong to the mainstream. And lots of Arab kids that I met after the riots in Paris, in the suburbs here, said, we're French, we're born here. But everybody says, where are you from? Nobody presumes that I'm French. And this whole notion of keeping somebody, making him the outsider. Now, the Poles and the Italians didn't have a problem because they belong to the Judeo-Christian tradition. And that is a problem, whether we like it or not. And I think people have to think of imaginative ways of dealing with this and move away from populist politics.
But let's be fair here as well. I mean, there's no question that the government is addressing a genuine concern. One of the reasons why Sarkozy won the presidency is because he addressed a concern that was bothering a lot of people, and he convinced a lot of people that he was the man to deal with it. There is a lot of anxiety, not just in France, but throughout Europe as well. What should the government be doing about it? Natalie, if I go to you first.
Well, I think the first thing to do is to address the concern, because if you don't address the concern, anxiety will grow, and it's going to be even worse amongst the different groups. Now, the question is, how do you address the concern? If you really step back, there are some elements in this law that are really the right things to do. The question is, how are they going to be implemented? And you raised the question of different races. It's always easier to integrate people that would really look like you. Now, how are we going to deal with people who are slightly different on a global level? How are we going to say they're among us and they're French too? There are psychologists who have studied those mechanisms of integrating different people on a team with very serious studies. And the biases, including the implicit biases, the ones that are the deepest, are more difficult to address when the skin color is different and when it's a different person. So there are ways to address those by putting those people in a positive and visible situation. That's one of the things that one of the associations I'm a member of is trying to achieve. There are different subtle things to be done at the global level in our society, and there are also things to be done in companies to make sure that slightly and progressively, our society as a whole will become more inclusive.
Philippe in Brussels, if I could bring you in here. Clearly you disagree with many of the assumptions behind the French government's policies on immigration. What advice would you be giving to Mr. Sarkozy at this point?
Well, to give advice, I would say that about integration, that I understand that he is concerned by integration and that he wants to promote integration. But I would do that in a positive way, not by imagining sanctions against people, but on the contrary, in order to help them to integrate in the society. The problem is that there is a shift in many member states. In the past, we were either not concerned by integration or we saw integration as a right, and today we now start to see integration as a duty, and we are even ready to sanction people who are not respecting from our point of view the integration requirements. And that's, I think, a very negative shift, because we forget that integration is a sociological process, and I have a lot of doubts about the effects and the efficiency of policies based on integration requirements, contract, and so on.
Stefan. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it's a bad assumption indeed. Like my colleague said, that the immigration is a bad thing, and we're seeing that today. There's a lot of concern. We've seen that in Belgium last Sunday with the elections, where the right-wing extremists won again. So yeah, addressing the concern is a way of winning votes, and that's a big problem, because it's not the case is not whether we address the concern, but we have to take it away. And how can we do that? That's by, one of the possibilities is by positive discrimination, which is legally forbidden here in France, because under the Republican ideas, everybody's equal. So nobody is, as a matter of fact. So yeah, that's a discussion we should have. Positive discrimination is a way, is an opportunity. As long as there's negative discrimination, why not allow positive discrimination?
Fear seems to be a big factor in all this. I'd just like to read a sentence from an article by Farid Zakaria, the Newsweek editor, this week. He wrote, "We've become a nation consumed by fear, worried about terrorists, rogue nations, Muslims and Mexicans, foreign companies and free trade, immigrants and international organizations. We see ourselves besieged and overwhelmed." But if you take away the reference to Mexicans, he could have been writing about France, the Netherlands,
absolutely.
or Britain. What on earth is wrong with us then?
No, I think this is a country where you have economic problems, you have huge unemployment, all these factors coming together. You feel you're under siege, and then you start looking for scapegoats. I spoke to the great Polish writer Richard Kapuczynski once, and I said, you know, in Poland you have no Jews. Why do you hate the Jews so much still? And he said, you know, if the Jews didn't exist, we would have invented another other. And this whole question of the foreigner being somebody who's hostile keeps coming back all the time. But I'd like to just point to one little thing in this whole raft of legislation that is being brought in, which is also the composition and the title of the Ministry of National Integration, Co-Development and national identity. Now, to put these two as if they were opposite factors within the same ministry is appeasement to the extreme right, but it's something which gives a very wrong signal to the immigrant population of this country as people who are not wanted. And secondly, how do you define national identity? And should the government be in the business of defining national identity in the first place?
Natalie, you seem to want to say something on that.
Yeah, there's an interesting parallel between France as a whole and individuals. There are some psychologists, again, who have studied the way that individuals can accept people who are different. And what we've seen is that people who have a high self-esteem have less difficulties working with people who are different than people who have a low self-esteem. So now what we're seeing is that in our countries, in Europe, for example, we are worrying about who we are, about our economic situation. We don't know exactly what the future is going to bring us. And I think this has a parallel with the fact that it's more difficult for us to accept the people who are different as a whole in France. And this is something to reflect upon.
Stefan, Do you have any views on that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, we should maybe learn that different is not worse or bad, or that different is just different. And
but where, in your view, does this fear come from? It's obviously been a big issue in Holland as well.
Yeah, it's a big issue in the Netherlands, which is rather strange because economically it's going very, very well. There's almost full employment. Yet, the last couple of years, 5-6 years, the Dutch have become very, very racist, and even in the highest level of society. So even people with the highest self-esteem, like you say, they are really racist, and it's like bon ton nowadays to be very pro-Dutch, and everything that's from outside the border, so it already starts with Belgium and Germany, that's bad. Very bad thing, and a very stupid thing, just like I said earlier, because in 10-15 years from now we won't be able to survive without new immigrants. So yeah, I don't know where it comes from, but it's very silly.
I think this is also symptomatic of the fact that the Netherlands and the French rejected the European Union Treaty, and part of the people who rejected the European Union Treaty, a large percentage of those were extreme right-wing voters or extreme left-wing voters as well, and they are the ones who feel most besieged. I think it's also a question of putting up barriers, and I think this development, the whole question of racism coming up again in the Netherlands, which once upon a time was considered to be the most tolerant, the freest, the most multiracial of all societies.
That's a myth.
Is that a myth?
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Okay.
Because the Dutch were tolerant because the foreigners brought money, and that was the only reason they were accepted. And as long as you didn't disturb the Dutch people, that was okay, and so it has nothing to do with tolerance in a philosophical sense of view. It's just basically, it's very pragmatic. It started with the Jews in the 16th century or 17th century who were chased from Antwerp, the southern Netherlands. They were very welcome in Amsterdam for the simple reason because they were very, very rich, and they brought the whole network.
Diamond industry.
Yeah, and the commercial network. So that's why they were welcome, but it has nothing to do with tolerance. And I think the Dutch now, maybe they were afraid to come out for it, but now they
And Stefan, that's where we're going to have to end it, I'm afraid. Vaiju Naravane, European correspondent of India's The Hindu newspaper, Stefan de Vries, Paris correspondent of the Dutch public television station RTL4, Nathalie Elbacha-Malige, the head of Diversio Company, and Philippe de Brucker, specialist on European immigration and asylum law. Thanks very much for taking part in this edition of The Debate. That's all for tonight. Bonsoir.